Hello, welcome back to Storytime Banned Books Read with me. I'm Kathleen Francis, and I'm glad to join you again this evening to talk about banned books and their authors and to explore a new title. But first, even though Black History Month has long since passed, I do recognize the fact that many Black American authors in this century just past and before have been regularly challenged and banned throughout America and the world. Among those, Richard Wright, Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, and James Baldwin. That list is lacking, for it's actually quite long. However, I would like to get down to the business of introducing you to James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk. This edition is more recent, though this work was originally published by Baldwin in 1974. This copyright is renewed by Gloria Baldwin Carifa Smart, and this edition here is a first vintage international edition from October 2006. By Random House. And before we begin, I can tell you that James Baldwin bowed to no one when it came to his identity and what he knew was his place in American literature. He was born in 1924 and educated in New York. He is the author of more than 20 works of both fiction and nonfiction. These include Go Tell It on the Mountain, Notes of a Native Son, Just Above My Head, and Going to Meet the Man. This list is also lacking, for he was very accomplished in the amount of work he produced. He has received numerous awards, such as the Eugene F. Saxon Memorial Trust Award, a Rosenwald Fellowship, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Partisan Review Fellowship, and a Ford Foundation grant. He was made a Commander of the Legion of Honor in 1986. He passed from this earth in 1987. Well, I am very fascinated by this individual, this American author, this Black American author, and will enjoy talking more about him and others. But without further ado, I'd like to begin this title, If Beale Street Could Talk, a novel by James Baldwin. For Yoran. Mary, Mary, what you going to name that pretty little baby? One. Troubled about my soul. I look at myself in the mirror. I know that I was christened Clementine, and so it would make sense if people called me Clem, or even, come to think of it, Clementine, since that's my name, but they don't. People call me Tish. I guess that makes sense too. I'm tired, and I'm beginning to think that maybe everything that happens makes sense. Like, if it didn't make sense, how could it happen? But that's really a terrible thought. It can only come out of trouble that doesn't make sense. Today, I went to see Fawny. That's not his name either. He was christened Alonzo, and it might make sense if people called him Lonnie, but no, we've always called him Fawny. Alonzo Hunt, that's his name. I've known him all my life, and I hope I'll always know him. But I only call him Alonzo when I have to break down some real heavy shit to him. Today I said, Alonzo? And he looked at me, that quickening look he has when I call him by his name. He's in jail. So where we were, I was sitting on a bench in front of a board, and he was sitting on a bench in front of a board, and we were facing each other through a wall of glass between us. You can't hear anything through this glass, and so you both have a little telephone. You have to talk through that. I don't know why people always look down when they talk through a telephone, but they always do. You have to remember to look up at the person you're talking to. I always remember now because he's in jail, and I love his eyes, and every time I see him, I'm afraid I'll never see him again. So I pick up the phone as soon as I get there, and I just hold it, and I keep looking up at him. So when I said, "Alonzo?" he looked down, and then he looked up, and he smiled, and he held the phone, and he waited. I hope that nobody has ever had to look at anybody they love through glass. And I didn't say it the way I meant to say it. I meant to say it in a very offhand way, so he wouldn't be too upset, so he'd understand that I was saying it without any kind of accusation in my heart. You see, I know him. He's very proud, and he worries a lot, and when I think about it, I know he doesn't, that's the biggest reason he's in jail. He worries too much already. I don't want him to worry about me. In fact, I didn't want to say what I had to say, but I knew I had to say it. He had to know. And I thought, too, that when he got over being worried, when he was lying by himself at night, when he was all by himself, in the very deepest part of himself, maybe, when he thought about it, he'd be glad. And that might help him. I said, "Alonzo, we're going to have a baby." I looked at him. I know I smiled. His face looked as though it were plunging into water. I couldn't touch him. I wanted so to touch him. I smiled again, and my hands got wet on the phone, and then for a moment I couldn't see him at all, and I shook my head, and my face was wet, and I said, I'm glad. Don't you worry. I'm glad." But he was far away from me now, all by himself. I waited for him to come back. I could see it flash across his face. My baby? I knew that he would think that. I don't mean that he doubted me, but a man thinks that. And for those few seconds, while he was out there by himself, away from me, the baby was the only real thing in the world, more real than the prison, more real than me. I should have said already, we're not married. That means more to him than it does to me, but I understand how he feels. We were going to get married, but then he went to jail. Fonny is 22. I am 19. He asked the ridiculous question, "Are you sure?" "No, I ain't sure. I'm just trying to mess with your mind." Then he grinned. He grinned because then he knew. "What we gonna do?" he asked me, just like a little boy. "Well, we ain't gonna drown it, so I guess we'll have to raise it." Fonny threw back his head and laughed. He laughed till tears come down his face. So then I felt that the first part that I'd been so frightened of would be all right. "Did you tell Frank?" he asked me. "Frank is his father." I said, "Not yet." "You tell your folks?" "Not yet, but don't worry about them. I just wanted to tell you first." "Well," he said, "I guess that makes sense." A baby. He looked at me. Then he looked down. "What you going to do, for real?" "I'm going to do just like I've been doing. I'll work up to just about the last month. And then Mama and Sis will take care for me. You ain't got to worry, and anyway, we have you out of here before then." "You sure about that?" with his little smile. "Of course I'm sure about that. I'm always sure about that." I knew what he was thinking, but I can't let myself think about it, not now, watching him. I must be sure. The man came up behind Fonny, and it was time to go. Fani smiled and raised his fist like always, and I raised mine, and he stood up. I'm always kind of surprised when I see him in here at how tall he is. Of course, he's lost weight, and that may make him seem taller. He turned around and went through the door, and the door closed behind him. I felt dizzy. I hadn't eaten much all day, and now it was getting late. I walked out to cross these big, wide corridors I've come to hate, corridors wider than all the Sahara Desert. The Sahara is never empty. These corridors are never empty. If you cross the Sahara and you fall, by and by vultures circle around you, smelling, sensing your death. They circle lower and lower. They wait. They know. They know exactly when the flesh is ready, when the spirit cannot fight back. The poor are always crossing the Sahara, and the lawyers and bondsmen and all that crowd circle around the poor exactly like vultures. Of course, they're not any richer than the poor. Really, that's why they've turned into vultures, scavengers, indecent garbage men. And I'm talking about the black cats, too, who, in so many ways, are worse. I think that, personally, I would be ashamed. But I've had to think about it, and now I think that maybe not. I don't know what I wouldn't do to get Fani out of jail. I've never come across any shame down here, except shame like mine, except the shame of the hard-working black ladies who call me daughter, and the shame of proud Puerto Ricans who don't understand what's happened. No one who speaks to them speaks Spanish, for example, and who are ashamed that they have loved ones in jail. But they are wrong to be ashamed. The people responsible for these jails should be ashamed. And I'm not ashamed of Fani. If anything, I'm proud. He's a man. You can tell by the way he's taken all this shit that he's a man. Sometimes, I admit, I'm scared, because nobody can take the shit they throw on us forever. But then, you just have to somehow fix your mind to get from one day to the next. And if you think too far ahead, if you even try to think too far ahead, you'll never make it. Sometimes I take the subway home. Sometimes I take the bus. Today I took the bus because it takes a little longer, and I had a lot on my mind. Being in trouble can have a funny effect on the mind. I don't know if I can explain this. You go through some days and you seem to be hearing people and you seem to be talking to them and you seem to be doing your work, or at least your work gets done. But you haven't seen or heard a soul, and if someone asked you what you have done that day, you'd have to think a while before you could answer. But at the same time, and even on the self-same day, and this is what is hard to explain, you see people like you never saw them before. They shine as bright as a razor. Maybe it's because you see people differently than you saw them before your trouble started. Maybe you wonder about them more, but in a different way, and this makes them very strange to you. Maybe you get scared and numb because you don't know if you can depend on people for anything anymore. And even if they wanted to do something, what could they do? I can't say to anybody in this bus, "Look, Fani is in trouble. He's in jail." Can you imagine what anybody on this bus would say to me if they knew from my mouth that I love somebody in jail? And I know he's never committed any crime, and he's a beautiful person. Please help me get him out. Can you imagine what anybody on this bus would say? What would you say? I can't say. I'm going to have this baby, and I'm scared, too, and I don't want anything to happen to my baby's father. Don't let him die in prison, please. Oh, please. You can't say that. That means you can't really say anything. Trouble means you're alone. You sit down and you look out the window and you wonder if you're going to spend the rest of your life going back and forth on this bus. And if you do, what's going to happen to your baby? What's going to happen to Fani? And if you ever did like the city, you don't like it anymore. If I ever get out of this, If we ever get out of this, I swear I'll never set foot in downtown New York again. Maybe I used to like it, a long time ago, when Daddy used to bring me and Sis here, and we'd watch the people and the buildings, and Daddy would point out different sights to us, and we might stop in Battery Park and have ice cream and hot dogs. Those were great days, and we were always very happy. But that was because of our father, not because of the city. It was because we knew our father loved us. Now, I can say, because I certainly know it now, the city didn't. They looked at us as though we were zebras, and you know, some people like zebras, and some people don't. But nobody ever asks the zebra. It's true that I haven't seen much of other cities, only Philadelphia and Albany, but I swear that New York must be the ugliest and the dirtiest city in the world. It must have the ugliest buildings and the nastiest people. It's got to have the worst cops. If any place is worse, it's got to be so close to hell that you can smell the people frying. And come to think of it, that's exactly the smell of New York in the summertime. I met Fonny in the streets of this city. I was little. He was not so little. I was around 6, somewhere around there, and he was around 9. They lived across the street, him and his family, his mother and 2 older sisters and his father ran a tailor shop. Looking back now, I kind of wonder who he ran the tailor shop for. We didn't know anybody who had money to take clothes to the tailor. Well, maybe once in a great while, but I don't think we could have kept him in business. Of course, as I've been told, colored people, weren't as poor then as they had been when Mama and Daddy were trying to get it together. They weren't as poor then as we had been in the South. But we were certainly poor enough, and we still are. I never really noticed Fonny until once we got into a fight after school. This fight didn't really have anything to do with Fonny and me at all. I had a girlfriend named Geneva, a kind of loud, raunchy girl, and her hair plaited tight on her head, with big ashy knees and long legs and big feet, and she was always into something. Naturally, she was my best friend, since I was never into anything. I was skinny and scared, and so I followed her and got into all her shit. Nobody else wanted me, really, and you know that nobody else wanted her. Well, she said that she couldn't stand Fonny. Every time she looked at him, it just made her sick. She was always telling me how ugly he was, with skin just like raw, wet potato rinds, and eyes like a Chinaman, and all that nappy hair and them thick lips, and so bow-legged he had bunions on his ankle bones, and the way his behind stuck out. His mother must have been a gorilla. I agreed with her because I had to, but I didn't really think he was as bad as all that. I kind of liked his eyes, and to tell the truth, I thought that if people in China had eyes like that, I wouldn't mind going to China. I had never seen a gorilla, so his behind looked perfectly normal to me, and wasn't really, when you had to think about it, as big as Geneva's. And it wasn't until much later that I realized that he was, yes, a little bow-legged. But Geneva was always up in Fonny's face. I don't think he ever noticed her at all. He was always too busy with his friends, who were the worst boys on the block. They were always coming down the street in rags, bleeding, full of lumps, and just before this fight, Fonny had lost a tooth. Fonny had a friend named Daniel, a big black boy, and Daniel had a thing about Geneva, something like the way Geneva had a thing about Fonny. And I don't remember how it all started, but finally Daniel had Geneva down on the ground, the 2 of them rolling around, and I was trying to pull Daniel off her, and Fonny was pulling on me. I turned around and hit him with the only thing I could get my hands on. I grabbed it out of the garbage can. It was only a stick, but it had a nail in it. The nail raked across his cheek, and it broke the skin, and the blood started dripping. I couldn't believe my eyes. I was so scared. Fonny put his hand to his face and then looked at me and then looked at his hand, and I didn't have any better sense than to drop the stick and run. Fonny ran after me, and to make matters worse, Geneva saw the blood and she started screaming that I'd killed him. I'd killed him. Fonny caught up to me in no time, and he grabbed me tight, and he spit at me through the hole where his tooth used to be. He caught me right on the mouth, and it so humiliated me, I guess, because he hadn't hit me or hurt me, and maybe because I sensed what he had not done, that I screamed and started to cry. It's funny. Maybe my life changed in that very moment when Fonny hit me in the mouth. Daniel and Geneva and Daniel, who had started the whole thing and didn't have a scratch on him, both began to scream at me. Geneva said that I'd killed him for sure. Yes, I'd killed him, because people caught the lockjaw and died from rusty nails. And Daniel said yes, he knew. He had an uncle down home who died like that. Fonny was listening to all this while the blood kept dripping and I kept crying. Finally, he must have realized that they were talking about him and that he was a dead man or boy, because he started crying too. And then Daniel and Geneva took him between them and walked off, leaving me there alone. And I didn't see Fonny for a couple of days. I was sure he had the lockjaw and was dying, and Geneva said that just as soon as he was dead, which would be any minute, the police would come and put me in the electric chair. I watched the tailor shop, but everything seemed normal. Mr. Hunt was there, with his laughing, light brown-skinned self, pressing pants and telling jokes to whoever was in the shop. There was always someone in the shop, and every once in a while Mrs. Hunt would come by. She was a sanctified woman, who didn't smile much, but still neither of them acted as if their son was dying. So, when I hadn't seen Fonny for a couple of days, I waited until the tailor shop seemed empty, and when Mr. Hunt was in there by himself, I went over there. Mr. Hunt knew me then a little, like we all knew each other on the block. "Hey, Tish," he said, "how you doing? How's the family?" I said, "Just fine, Mr. Hunt." I wanted to say, "How's your family?" which I always did say, and he planned to say, but I couldn't. "How you doing in school?" he asked me after a minute, and I thought he looked at me in a real strange way. "Oh, all right," I said, and my heart started to beating like it was going to jump out of my chest. Mr. Hunt pressed down that sort of double ironing board they have in tailor shops, like two ironing boards facing each other. He pressed that down, and he looked at me for a minute, and then he laughed and said, "Reckon that big-headed boy of mine be back here pretty soon." I heard what he said, and I understood something, but I didn't know what it was I understood. I walked to the door of the shop, making like I was going out, and then I turned and I said, "What's that, Mr. Hunt?" Mr. Hunt was still smiling. He pulled the presser down and turned over the pants or whatever it was he had in there and said, "Fonny. His mama sent him down to her folks in the country for a little while. Claimed he get into too much trouble up here." He pressed the presser down again. "She don't know what kind of trouble he like to get in down there." Then he looked up at me and he smiled. When I got to know Fonny, and I got to know Mr. Hunt better, I realized that Fonny had his smile. "Oh, I'll tell him you come by," he said. I said, "Say hello to the family for me, Mr. Hunt," and I ran across the street. Geneva was on my stoop, and she told me I looked like a fool and that I'd almost got run over. I stopped and said, "You a liar, Geneva Braithwaite. Fonny ain't got the lockjaw, and he ain't going to die. And I ain't going to jail. Now you just go and ask his daddy." And then Geneva gave me such a funny look that I ran up my stoop and up the stairs, and I sat down on the fire escape, but sort of in the window where she couldn't see me. Fonny came back about 4 or 5 days later, and he came over to my stoop. He didn't have a scar on him. He had 2 doughnuts. He sat down on my stoop. He said, "I'm sorry I spit in your face." And he gave me one of his doughnuts. I said, "I'm sorry I hit you." And then we didn't say anything. He ate his doughnut and I ate mine. People don't believe it about boys and girls that age. People don't believe much, and I'm beginning to know why. But then we got to be friends. Or maybe, and it's really the same thing, something else people don't want to know. I got to be his little sister, and he got to be my big brother. He didn't like his sisters, and I didn't have any brothers, so we got to be for each other what the other missed. Geneva got mad at me, and she stopped being my friend, though maybe, now that I think about it, without even knowing it, I stopped being her friend, because now, and without knowing what that meant, I had Fonny. Daniel got mad at Fonny. He called him a sissy for fooling around with girls, and he stopped being Fonny's friend. For a long time, they even had a fight, and Fonny lost another tooth. I think that anyone watching Fonny then was sure that he'd grow up without a single tooth in his head. I remember telling Fonny that I'd get my mother's scissors from upstairs and go and kill Daniel, but Fonny said I wasn't nothing but a girl and didn't have nothing to do with it. Fonny had to go to church on Sundays, and I mean he had to go, though he managed to outwit his mother more often than she knew or cared to know. His mother, I got to know her better, too, later on, and we're going to talk about her in a minute, was, as I've said, a sanctified woman, and if she couldn't save her husband, she was damn sure going to save her child, because it was her child. It wasn't their child. I think that's why Fonny was so bad, and I think that's why he was, when you got to know him, so nice. A really nice person, a really sweet man, with something very sad in him, when you got to know him. Mr. Hunt, Frank, didn't try to claim him, but he loved him, loves him. The 2 older sisters weren't sanctified exactly, but they might as well have been, and they certainly took after their mother. So that left just Frank and Fonny. In a way, Frank had Fonny all week long. Fonny had Frank all week long. They both knew this, and that's why Frank could give Fonny to his mother on Sundays. What Fonny was doing in the street was just exactly what Frank was doing in the tailor shop and in the house. He was being bad. That's why he held on to that tailor shop as long as he could. That's why, when Fonny came home bleeding, Frank could tend to him. That's why they could, both the father and the son, love me. It's not really a mystery, except it's always a mystery about people. I used to wonder later if Fonny's mother and father ever made love together. I asked Fonny, and Fonny said, "Yeah, but not like you and me." I used to hear them. She'd come home from church, wringing wet and funky. She'd act like she was so tired she could hardly move, and she'd just fall across the bed with her clothes on. She'd maybe had enough strength to take off her shoes and her hat, and she'd always lay her handbag down someplace. I can still hear that sound, like something heavy, with silver inside it, dropping heavy wherever she laid it down. I'd hear her say, "The Lord sure bless my soul this evening. Honey, when you going to give your life to the Lord?" And baby, he'd say, I swear to you, he was lying there with his dick getting hard, and excuse me, baby, but her condition weren't no better, because this, you dig, was like the game you hear 2 alley cats playing in the alley. Shit, she going to whelp and meow till times get better. She going to get that cat. She's going to run him all over the alley. She's going to run him till he bite her by the neck. By this time, he just want to get some sleep, really, but she got her chorus going. He's got to stop the music, and ain't but one way to do it. He's going to bite her by the neck, and then she got him. So, my daddy just lay there, didn't have no clothes on, with his dick getting harder and harder, and my daddy would say, about the time, I reckon, that the Lord gives his life to me. And she'd say, "Oh, Frank, let me bring you to the Lord." And he'd say, "Shit, woman, I'm going to bring the Lord to you. I'm the Lord." And she'd start crying and she'd moan, "Lord, help me, help this man. You give him to me. I can't do nothing about it. Oh, Lord, help me." And he'd say, "The Lord's going to help you, sugar, just as soon as you get to be a little child again, naked like a little child. Come on, come to the Lord." And she'd start to crying and calling on Jesus while he started taking all her clothes off. I could hear them kind of rustling and whistling and tearing and falling to the floor, and sometimes I'd get my foot caught in one of them things when I was coming through their room in the morning on my way to school. And when he got her naked and got on top of her and she was still crying, "Jesus, help me, Lord," my daddy would say, "You got the Lord now, right here. Where you want your blessing? Where do it hurt? Where you want the Lord's hands to touch you? Here, here, or here? Where you want his tongue? Where you want the Lord to enter you, you dirty, dumb black bitch? You bitch? You bitch? You bitch?" And he'd slap her hard, loud, and she'd say, "Oh, Lord, help me to bear my burden." And he'd say, "Here it is, baby. You're going to bear it all right. I know it. You got a friend in Jesus, and I'm going to tell you when he comes, the first time. We don't know nothing about the second coming, yet." And the bed would shake, and she would moan and moan and moan, and in the morning was just like nothing ever happened. She was just like she had been, and still belonged to Jesus, and he went off down to the street to the shop. And then Fawny said, "Hadn't been for me, I believe the cat would have split the scene. I'll always love my daddy because he didn't leave me. I'll always remember Fawny's face when he talked about his daddy." Then Fawny would turn to me and take me in his arms and laugh and say, "You remind me a lot of my mother. You know that? Come on now, and let's sing together. Sinner, do you love my Lord? And if I don't hear no moaning, I'll know you ain't been saved." I guess it can't be too often that two people can laugh and make love too. Make love because they are laughing. Laugh because they're making love. The love and the laughter come from the same place, but not many people go there. Fawny asked me one Saturday if I could come to church with him in the morning, and I said yes, though we were Baptists and weren't supposed to go to a sanctified church. But by this time, everybody knew that Fawny and I were friends, and it was simply just a fact. At school and all up and down the block, they called us Romeo and Juliet, though this was not because they'd read the play. And here Fawny came, looking absolutely miserable, with his hair all slicked and shiny, with the part in his hair so cruel that it looked like it had been put there with a tomahawk or a razor, wearing his blue suit, and Sis had got me dressed, and so we went. It was like, when you think about it, our first date. His mother was waiting downstairs. It was just before Easter, so it wasn't cold, but it wasn't hot. Now, although we were little, and I certainly couldn't be dreaming of taking Fawny from her or anything like that, and although she didn't really love Fawny, only thought that she was supposed to because she had spasmed him into the world, already Fawny's mother didn't like me. I could tell from lots of things, such as, for example, I hardly ever went to Fawny's house, but Fawny was always at mine. And this wasn't because Fawny and Frank didn't want me in their house. It was because the mother and them two sisters didn't want me. In one way, as I realized later, they didn't think that I was good enough for Fawny, which really means that they didn't think that I was good enough for them. And in another way, they felt that I was maybe just exactly what Fawny deserved. Well, I'm dark and my hair is just plain hair, and there is nothing very outstanding about me, and not even Fawny bothers to pretend I'm pretty. He just says that pretty girls are a terrible drag. When he says this, I know that he's thinking about his mother. That's why, when he wants to tease me, he tells me I remind him of his mother. I don't remind him of his mother at all, and he knows that, but he also knows that I know how much he loved her, how much he wanted to love her, to be allowed to love her, to have that translation read. Mrs. Hunt and the girls are fair, and you could see that Mrs. Hunt had been a very beautiful girl down there in Atlanta, where she comes from. and she still has that look, that "don't you touch me" look, that women who were beautiful carry with them to the grave. The sisters weren't as beautiful as the mother, and, of course, they'd never been young in Atlanta, but they were fair-skinned, and their hair was long. Fonny is lighter than me, but much darker than they. His hair is just plain nappy, and all the grease his mother put into it every Sunday couldn't take out the naps. Fonny really takes after his father, so Mrs. Hunt gave me a real sweet, patient smile as Fonny brought me out the house that Sunday morning. "I'm mighty pleased you come into the house of the Lord this morning, Tish," she said. "My, you look pretty this morning." The way she said it made me know what I must have looked like other mornings. It made me know what I looked like. I said, "Good morning, Mrs. Hunt," and we started down the street. It was a Sunday morning street. Our streets have days and even hours. When I was born, where I was born, and where my baby will be born, you look down the street and you can almost see what's happening in the house. Like, say, Saturday at 3 in the afternoon is a very bad hour. The kids are home from school. The men are home from work. You think that this might be a very happy get-together, but it isn't. The kids see the men see the kids. And this drives the women who are cooking and cleaning and straightening hair, and who see what men won't see, almost crazy. You can see it in the streets. You can hear it in the way the women yell for their children. You can see it in the way they come down out of the house, in a rush like a storm, and slap the children and drag them upstairs. You can hear it in the child. You can see it in the way the men, ignoring all this, stand together in front of a railing, sit together in the barber shop, pass a bottle between them, walk to the corner to the bar, tease the girl behind the bar, fight with each other, get very busy later with their vines. Saturday afternoon is like a cloud hanging over, like waiting for a storm to break. But on Sunday mornings the clouds have lifted. The storm has done its damage and gone. No matter what the damage was, everybody's clean now. The women have somehow managed to get it all together, to hold everything together. So here everybody is, clean, scrubbed, brushed, and greased. Later, they're going to eat ham hocks or chitterlings or fried or roasted chicken with yams and rice and greens, or cornbread and biscuits. They're going to come home and fall out and be friendly. And some men wash their cars on Sundays more carefully than they wash their foreskins. Walking down the street that Sunday morning, with Fonny walking beside me like a prisoner, and Mrs. Hunt on the other side of me, like a queen making great strides into the kingdom, was like walking through a fair. But now I think that it was only Fonny, who didn't say a word, that made it seem like a fair. We heard the church tambourines from a block away. "Sure wish we could get your father to come out to the Lord's house one of these mornings," Mrs. Hunt said. Then she looked at me. "What church do you usually go to, Tish?" "Well, as I've said, we were Baptists, but we didn't go to church very often. Maybe Christmas or Easter, days like that. Mama didn't dig the church sisters, who didn't dig her. And Sis kind of takes after Mama, and Daddy didn't see any point in running after the Lord, and he didn't seem to have very much respect for him." I said, "We go to Abyssinia Baptist," and looked at the cracks in the sidewalk. "That's a very handsome church," said Mrs. Hunt, as though that was the best thing that could possibly be said about it, and that certainly wasn't much. It was 11 in the morning. Service had just begun. Actually, Sunday school had begun at 9, and Fonny was usually supposed to be in church for that. But on this Sunday morning he had been given a special dispensation because of me. And the truth is, too, that Mrs. Hunt was kind of lazy and didn't really like getting up that early to make sure Fonny was in Sunday school. In Sunday school, there wasn't anybody to admire her carefully washed and covered body, and her snow-white soul. Frank was not about to get up and take Fawny off to Sunday school, and the sisters didn't want to dirty their hands on their nappy-headed brother. So Mrs. Hent, sighing deeply and praising the Lord, would have to get up and get Fawny dressed. But of course, if she didn't take him to Sunday school by the hand, he didn't usually get there. And many times that woman fell out happy in church without knowing the whereabouts of her only son. "Whatever Alice don't feel like being bothered with," Frank was to say to me much later, "she leaves in the hands of the Lord." The church had been a post office. I don't know how come the building had to be sold, or why, come to that, anybody had wanted to buy it, but it still looked like a post office, long and dark and low. They had knocked down some walls and put in some benches and put up the church signs and the church schedules, but the ceiling was that awful kind of wrinkled tin, and they had either painted it brown or had left it unpainted. When you come in, the pulpit looked like a mighty long ways off. To tell the truth, I think the people in the church were just proud that their church was so big and that they had somehow got their hands on it. Of course, I was, more or less, used to Abyssinia. It was brighter and had a balcony. I used to sit in that balcony on Mamma's knees. Every time I think of a certain song, "Uncloudy Day," I'm back in that balcony again on Mamma's knees. Every time I hear "Blessed Quietness," I think of Fawny's church and Fawny's mother. I don't mean that either the song or the church was quiet, but I don't remember ever hearing that song in our church. I'll always associate that song with Fawny's church because when they sang it on that Sunday morning, Fawny's mother got happy. Watching people get happy and fall out under the power is always something to see, and even if you see it all the time. But people didn't often get happy in our church. We were more respectable, more civilized than sanctified. I still find something in it very frightening, but I think this is because Fawny hated it. That church was so wide it had 3 aisles. Now, just to the contrary of what you might think, it's much harder to find the central aisle than it is when there's just one aisle down the middle. You have to have an instinct for it. We entered that church and Mrs. Hunt led us straight down the aisle, which was the farthest to the left, so that everybody from 2 aisles over had to turn and watch us. And, frankly, we were something to watch. There was black, long-legged me in a blue dress with my hair straightened and with a blue ribbon in it. There was Fawny, who held me by the hand in a kind of agony in his white shirt, blue suit, and blue tie, his hair grimly, despairingly shining, not so much from the Vaseline in his hair as from the sweat in his scalp. And there was Mrs. Hunt, who somehow, I don't know how, from the moment we walked through the church doors, became filled with a stern love for her 2 little heathens and marched us before her to the mercy seat. She was wearing something pink or beige, I'm not quite sure now, but in all that gloom it showed. And she was wearing one of those awful hats women used to wear, which have a veil on them which stops at about the level of the eyebrow or the nose, and which always makes you look like you have some disease. She wore high heels, too, which made a certain sound, something like pistols, and she carried her head very high and noble. She was saved the moment she entered the church. She was sanctified holy. And I even remember until today how much she made me tremble all of a sudden deep inside. It was like there was nothing you could ever hope to say to her unless you wanted to pass through the hands of the living God, and he would check it out with her before he answered you. The mercy seat. She led us to the front row and sat us down before it. She made us sit, but she knelt. On her knees, I mean, in front of her seat, and bowed her head and covered her eyes, making sure she didn't fuck with that veil. I stole a look at Fawny, but Fawny wouldn't look at me. Mrs. Hunt rose. She faced the entire congregation for a moment, and then she modestly sat down. Somebody was testifying, a young man with kind of reddish hair. He was talking about the Lord and how the Lord had dyed all the spots out of his soul and taken all the lust out of his flesh. When I got older, I used to see him around. His name was George. I used to see him nodding on the stoop or on the curb, and he died of an overdose. The congregation amened him to death. A big sister in the pulpit in her long white robe jumped up and did a little shout. They cried, "Help him, Lord Jesus, help him!" And the moment he sat down, another sister, her name was Rose, and not much later she was going to disappear from the church and have a baby, and I still remember the last time I saw her, when I was about 14, walking the streets in the snow, with her face all marked and her hands all swollen and a rag around her head, and her stockings falling down, singing to herself. Stood up and started singing. How did you feel when you come out of the wilderness leaning on the Lord? Then Fawny did look at me, just for a second. Mrs. Hunt was singing and clapping her hands, and a kind of fire in the congregation mounted. Now I began to watch another sister, seated on the other side of Fawny, darker and plainer than Mrs. Hunt, but just as well dressed, who was throwing up her hands and crying, "Holy, holy, holy! Bless your name, Jesus! Bless your name, Jesus!" And Mrs. Hunt started crying out, and seemed to be answering her. It was like they were trying to outdo each other. And the sister was dressed in blue, dark, dark blue, and she was wearing a matching blue hat, the kind of hat that sits back like a skull cap. And the hat had a white rose in it, and every time she moved, it moved. Every time she bowed, the white rose bowed. The white rose was like some weird kind of light, especially since she was so dark, and in such a dark dress. Fawny and I just sat there between them, while the voices of the congregation rose and rose and rose around us, without any mercy at all. Fawny and I weren't touching each other, and we didn't look at each other, and yet we were holding on to each other like children in a rocking boat. A boy in the back, I got to know him later on, too, his name was Teddy, a big brown-skinned boy, heavy everywhere except just where he should have been, thighs, hands, behind, and feet, something like a mushroom turned upside down, started singing. Blessed quietness, holy quietness. What assurance in my soul, sang Mrs. Hunt. On the stormy sea, sang the dark sister on the other side of Fawny. Jesus speaks to me, sang Mrs. Hunt. And the billows cease to roll, sang the dark sister. Teddy had the tambourine, and this he gave the cue to the piano player. I never got to know him, a long, dark, evil-looking brother with hands made for strangling, and with those hands he attacked the keyboard like he was beating the brains out of someone he remembered. No doubt the congregation had their memories too, and they went to pieces. The church began to rock, and rocked me and Fawny too, though they didn't know it, and in a very different way. Now we knew that nobody loved us, or now we knew who did. Whoever loved us was not here. It's funny what you hold on to get through terror when terror surrounds you. I guess I'll remember until I die that black lady's white rose. Suddenly it seemed to stand straight up in that awful place, and I grabbed Fawny's hand. I didn't know I grabbed it, and on either side of us, all of a sudden, the two women were dancing, shouting, the holy dance. The lady with the rose had her head forward, and the rose moved like lightning around her head, our heads, and the lady with the veil had her head back, the veil which was now far above her forehead, which framed that forehead, seemed like the sprinkling of black water, baptizing us and sprinkling her. People moved around us to give them room, and they danced into the middle aisle. Both of them held their handbags. Both of them wore high heels. Fawny and I never went to church again. We have never talked about our first date. Only when I first had to go and see him in the tombs, and walked up those steps and into those halls, it was just like walking into church. Now that I had told Fonny about the baby, I knew I had to tell Mama and Sis. But her real name is Ernestine. She's 4 years older than me, and Daddy, and Frank. I got off the bus, and I didn't know which way to go, a few blocks west to Frank's house, or 1 block east to mine. But I felt so funny, I thought I'd better get home. I really wanted to tell Frank before I told Mama, but I didn't think I could walk that far. My Mama's a kind of strange woman, so people say, and she was 24 when I was born, so she's past 40 now. I must tell you, I love her. I think she's a beautiful woman. She may not be beautiful to look at, whatever the fuck that means, in this kingdom of the blind. Mama started to put on a little weight. Her hair is turning gray, but only way down at the nape of her neck, in what her generation called the kitchen, and in the very center of her head, so she's gray visibly only if she bows her head or turns her back, and God knows she doesn't often do either. If she's facing you, she's black on black. Her name is Sharon. She used to try to be a singer, and she was born in Birmingham. She managed to get out of that corner of hell by the time she was 19, running away with a traveling band, but more especially with the drummer. That didn't work out, because, as she says, I don't know if I ever loved him, really. I was young, but I think now that I was younger than I should have been for my age, if you see what I mean. Anyway, I know I wasn't woman enough to help the man, to give him what he needed. He went away. That is, one way, and she went another. And she ended up in Albany, of all places, working as a barmaid. She was 20, and had come to realize that, though she had a voice, she wasn't a singer. That to endure and embrace the life of a singer demands a whole lot more than a voice. This meant that she was kind of lost. She felt herself going under. People were going under around her. Every day. And Albany isn't exactly God's gift to black folks either. Of course, I must say that I don't think America is God's gift to anybody. If it is, God's days have got to be numbered. That God these people say they serve, and do serve in ways that they don't know, has got a very nasty sense of humor. Like you'd beat the shit out of him if he was a man, or if you were. In Albany, she met Joseph, my father, and she met him in the bus stop. She had just quit her job, and he had just quit his. He's 5 years older than she is, and he had been a porter in the bus station. He had come from Boston, and he was really a merchant seaman, but he had sort of got himself trapped in Albany, mainly because of this older woman he was going with then, who really just didn't dig him going on sea voyages. By the time Sharon, my mother, walked into that bus station with her little cardboard suitcase and her big scared eyes, things were just about ending between himself and this woman. Joseph didn't like bus stations, and it was the time of the Korean War, so he knew that if he didn't get back to the sea soon, he'd be in the army, and he certainly would not have dug that. As sometimes happens in life, everything came to a head at the same time. And here came Sharon. He says, and I believe him, that he knew he wasn't going to let her out of his sight the moment he saw her walk away from that ticket window and sit down by herself on a bench and look around her. She was trying to look tough and careless, but she just looked scared. He says he wanted to laugh, and at the same time, something in her frightened eyes made him want to cry. He walked over to her, and he wasted no time. "Excuse me, miss, are you going to the city?" "To New York City, you mean?" "Yes, miss, to New York City." "Yes," she said, staring at him. "I am too," he said, having just at that minute decided it, but being pretty sure that he had the money for a ticket on him. "But I don't know the city real well. Do you know it?" "Why, no, not too well," she said, looking more scared than ever because she really didn't have any idea who this nut could be or what he was after. She'd been to New York a few times with her drummer. "Well, I've got an uncle lives there," he said, "and he give me this address, and I just wonder if you know where it is." He hardly knew New York at all, and he'd always worked mainly out of San Francisco. And he gave Mamma an address just off the top of his head, which made her look even more frightened. It was an address somewhere down off Wall Street. "Why, yes," she said, "but I don't know if any colored people live down there." She didn't dare tell this maniac that nobody lived down there. There wasn't a damn thing down there but cafeterias, warehouses, and office buildings. "Only white people," she said, and she was kind of looking for a place to run. "That's right," he said. "My uncle's a white man." And he sat down next to her. He had to go to the ticket window to get his ticket, but he was afraid to walk away from her yet. He was afraid she'd disappear. And now the bus came, and she stood up. So he stood up and picked up her bag and said, "Allow me," and took her by the elbow and marched her over to the ticket window, and she stood next to him while he bought his ticket. There really wasn't anything else that she could do unless she wanted to start screaming for help, and she couldn't, anyway, stop him from getting on the bus. She'd hoped she'd figure out something before they got to New York. Well, that was the last time my daddy ever saw that bus station, and the very last time he carried a stranger's bags. She hadn't got rid of him by the time they got to New York, of course, and he didn't seem to be in any great hurry to find his white uncle. They got to New York, and he helped her get settled in a rooming house, and he went to the Y. And he came to get her the next morning for breakfast. Within a week, he had married her and gone back to sea with my mother, a little stunned, and settled down to live. She'll take the news of the baby all right, I believe, and so will Sis Ernestine. Daddy may take it kind of rough, but that's just because he does not know as much about his daughter as Mamma and Ernestine do. Well, he'll be worried too in another way, and he'll show it more. Nobody was home when I finally made it up to that top floor of ours. We lived here for about 5 years, and it's not a bad apartment, as housing projects go. Fonny and I had been planning to fix it up a loft down in the East Village, and we'd looked at quite a few. It just seemed better for us because we couldn't really afford to live in a project, and Fonny hates them, and there'd be no place for Fonny to work on his sculptures. The other places in Harlem are even worse than the projects. You'd never be able to start your new life in those places. You remember them too well, and you'd never want to bring up your baby there. But it's something, when you think about it, how many babies were brought into those places, with rats big as cats, roaches the size of mice, splinters the size of a man's finger, and somehow survived it. You don't want to think about those who didn't. And to tell the truth, there's always something very sad in those who did or do. I hadn't been home more than 5 minutes when Mamma walked through the door. She was carrying a shopping bag, and she was wearing what I call her shopping hat, which is a kind of floppy beige beret. "How you doing, little one?" she smiled, and she gave me a sharp look, too. "How's Fonny?" "He's just the same. He's fine. He sends his love." "Good. You see the lawyer?" "Not today. I have to go on Monday, after work." "He been to see Fonny?" "No." She sighed and took off her hat and put it on the TV set. I picked up the shopping bag and we walked into the kitchen. Mamma started putting things away. I half sat, half leaned on the sink, and I watched her. Then, for a minute there, I got scared, and my belly kind of turned over. Then I realized that I'm into my 3rd month. I've got to tell. Nothing shows yet, but one day Mama's going to give me another sharp look. And then, suddenly, half leaning, half sitting there, watching her, she was at the refrigerator, she looked critically at a chicken and put it away. She was kind of humming under her breath, but the way you hum when your mind is concentrated on something painful, just about to come around the corner, just about to hit you. I suddenly had this feeling that she already knew, had known all along, had only been waiting for me to tell her. I said, "Mama?" "Yeah, little bit," still humming. But I didn't say anything. So after a minute, she closed the refrigerator door and turned and looked at me. I started to cry. It was her look. She stood there for a minute. She came and put a hand on my forehead and then a hand on my shoulder. She said, "Come on in my room. Your daddy and sis be here soon." We went into her room and sat down on the bed, and Mama closed the door. She didn't touch me. She just sat very still. It was like she had to be very together because I had gone to pieces. She said, "Tish, I declare, I don't think you got nothing to cry about." She moved a little. "You tell Fonny?" "I just told him today. I figured I should tell him first." "You did right. And I bet he just grinned all over his face, didn't he?" I kind of stole a look at her and I laughed. "Yes, he sure did." "You must, let's see, you about 3 months gone?" "Almost." "What you crying about?" Then she did touch me. She took me in her arms and she rocked me and I cried. She got me a handkerchief and I blew my nose. She walked to the window and she blew hers. "Now listen," she said. "You got enough on your mind without worrying about being a bad girl and all that jive-ass shit. I sure hope I raised you better than that. If you was a bad girl, you wouldn't be sitting on that bed. You'd be long been turning tricks for the warden." She came back to the bed and sat down. She seemed to be raking her mind for the right words. "Tish," she said, "when we was first brought here, the white man, he didn't give us no preachers to say words over us before we had our babies. And you and Fonny be together right now, married or not, wasn't for that same damn white man. So let me tell you what you got to do. You got to think about that baby. You got to hold on to that baby. Don't care what else happens or don't happen. You got to do that. Can't nobody else do that for you. And the rest of us, well, we going to hold on to you. And we going to get Fonny out. Don't you worry. I know it's hard, but don't you worry. And that baby be the best thing that ever happened to Fonny. He needs that baby. It going to give him a whole lot of courage." She put one finger under my chin, a trick she has sometimes, and she looked me in the eyes, smiling. "Am I getting through to you, Tish?" "Yes, Mama, yes. Now, when your daddy and Ernestine get home, we're going to sit at the table together, and I'll make the family announcement. I think that might be easier, don't you?" "Yes, yes." She got up from the bed. "Take off them street clothes and lie down for a minute. I'll come get you." She opened the door. "Yes, Mama." "Mama?" "Yes, Tish." "Thank you, Mama." She laughed. "Well, Tish, daughter, I do not know what you thanking me for, but you surely more than welcome." She closed the door, and I heard her in the kitchen. I took off my coat and my shoes and lay back on the bed. It was the hour when darkness begins, when the sounds of the night begin. The doorbell rang. I heard Mama yell, "Be right there!" And then she came into the room again. She was carrying a small water glass with a little whiskey in it. "Here, sit up. Drink this. Do you good." Then she closed the bedroom door behind her, and I heard her heels along the hall that leads to the front door. It was Daddy. He was in a good mood. I heard his laugh. "Tish home yet?" "She's taking a little nap inside. She was kind of beat." "She see Fonny?" "Yeah, she saw Fonny. She saw the inside of the tombs, too. That's why I made her lie down." "What about the lawyer?" "She going to see him Monday." Daddy made a sound. I heard the refrigerator door open and close, and he poured himself a beer. "Where's Sis?" "She'll be here. She had to work late." "How much you think them damn lawyers is going to cost us before this is over?" "Joe, you know damn well ain't no point in asking me that question." Well, they sure got it made, the rotten motherfuckers. Amen to that. By now, Mama had poured herself some gin and orange juice and was sitting at the table opposite him. She was swinging her foot. She was thinking ahead. How'd it go today? All right. Daddy works on the docks. He doesn't go to sea anymore. All right means that he probably didn't have to curse out more than one or two people all day long or threaten anyone with death. Fonny gave Mama one of his first pieces of sculpture. This was almost 2 years ago. Something about it always makes me think of Daddy. Mama put it by itself on a small table in the living room. It's not very high. It's done in black wood. It's of a naked man with one hand at his forehead and the other half hiding his sex. The legs are long, and very wide apart, and one foot seems planted, unable to move, and the whole motion of the figure is torment. It seemed a very strange figure for such a young kid to do, or at least it seemed strange until you thought about it. Fonny used to go to a vocational school where they teach kids to make all kinds of shitty, really useless things like card tables and hassocks and chests of drawers which nobody's ever going to buy because who buys handmade furniture? The rich don't do it. They say the kids are dumb, and so they're teaching them to work with their hands. Those kids aren't dumb, but the people who run these schools want to make us sure that they don't get smart. They are really teaching the kids to be slaves. Fonny didn't go for it at all, and he split, taking most of the wood from the workshop with him. It took him about a week, tools one day, wood the next, but the wood was a problem because you can't put it in your pocket or under your coat. Finally, he and a friend broke in the school after dark, damn near emptied the workshop, and then loaded the wood into a friend's brother's car. They hid some of the wood in the basement of a friendly janitor, and Fonny brought the tools to my house. Some of that wood is still under my bed. Fonny had found something that he could do, that he wanted to do, and this saved him from the death that was waiting to overtake the children of our age. Though the death took many forms, though people died early in many different ways, the death itself was very simple, and the cause was simple, too, as simple as a plague. The kids had been told that they weren't worth shit, and everything they saw around them proved it. They struggled, but they fell like flies, and they congregated on the garbage heaps of their lives like flies. And perhaps I clung to Fonny, perhaps Fonny saved me because he was just about the only boy I knew who wasn't fooling around with the needles or drinking cheap wine or mugging people or holding up stores. And he never got his hair conked. It just stayed nappy. He started working as a short-order cook in the barbecue joint so he could eat, and he found a basement where he could work on his wood, and he was at our house more often than he was at his own house. At his house there was always fighting. Mrs. Hunt couldn't stand Fonny or Fonny's ways, and the two sisters sided with Mrs. Hunt, especially now. They were in terrible trouble, because now they were in terrible trouble. They had been raised to be married, but there wasn't anybody around them good enough for them. They were really just ordinary Harlem girls, even though they'd made it as far as City College. But absolutely nothing was happening for them at City College. Nothing. The brothers with degrees didn't want them. Those who wanted their women black wanted them black, and those who wanted their women white wanted them white. So there they were, and they blamed it all on Fonny. Between the mother's prayers, which were more like curses, and the sisters' tears, which were more like orgasms, Fonny didn't stand a chance. Neither was Frank a match for these three hags. He just got angry, and you can just about imagine the shouting that went on in that house. And Frank had started drinking. I couldn't blame him. And sometimes he came to our house, too, pretending that he was looking for Fonny. It was much worse for him than it was for Fonny, and he had lost the tailor shop and was working in the garment center. He had started to depend on Fonny now, the way Fonny had once depended on him. Neither of them, anyway, as you can see, had any other house they could go to. Frank went to bars, but Fawny didn't like bars. That same passion which saved Fawny got him into trouble and put him in jail. For you see, he had found his center, his own center, inside him, and it showed. He wasn't anybody's nigger. And that's a crime in this fucking free country. You're supposed to be somebody's N-word. And if you're nobody's N-word, then you're a bad N-word. And that's what the cops decided when Fawny moved downtown. Ernestine has come in with her bony self. I can hear her teasing Daddy. She works with kids in a settlement house way downtown. Kids up to the age of 14 or so, all colors, boys and girls. It's very hard work, but she digs it. I guess if she didn't dig it, she couldn't do it. It's funny about people. When Ernestine was little, she was as vain could be. She always had her hair curled and her dresses were always clean, and she was always in front of that damn mirror, like she just could not believe how beautiful she was. I hated her. Since she was nearly 4 years older than me, she considered me beneath her notice. We fought like cats and dogs, or maybe it was more like two bitches. Mama tried not to worry too much about it. She figured that Sis, I called her Sis as a way of calling her out of her name, and also maybe as a way of claiming her, was probably cut out for show business, and would end up on the stage. This thought did not fill her heart with joy, but she had to remember my mother, Sharon, that she had once tried to be a singer. All of a sudden, it seemed almost like from one day to the next, all that changed. Sis got tall, for one thing, tall and skinny. She took to wearing slacks and tying up her hair, and she started reading books like books were going out of style. Whenever I'd come home from school and she was there, she'd be curled up on something or lying on the floor reading. She stopped reading newspapers. She stopped going to the movies. "I don't need no more of the white man's lying shit," she said. "He's fucked with my mind enough already." At the same time, she didn't become rigid or unpleasant, and she didn't talk, not for a long time anyway, about what she read. She got to be much nicer to me, and her face began to change. It became bonier and more private, much more beautiful. Her long, narrow eyes darkened with whatever it was they were beginning to see. She gave up her plans for going to college and worked for a while in a hospital. She met a little girl in that hospital. The little girl was dying, and at the age of 12, she was already a junkie. And this wasn't a black girl. She was Puerto Rican. And then Ernestine started working with children. "Where's Jezebel?" Sis started calling me Jezebel after I got my job at the perfume center of the department store where I work now. The store thought that it was very daring, very progressive, to give this job to a colored girl. I stand behind that damn counter all day long, smiling till my back teeth ache, letting tired old ladies smell the back of my hand. Sis claimed that I came home smelling like a Louisiana whore. "She's home. She's lying down." "She all right?" "She's tired. She went to see Fawny." "How's Fawny taking it?" "Taking it." "Lord, let me make myself a drink. You want me to cook?" "No, I'll get into the pots in a minute." "She see Mr. Hayward?" "Arnold Hayward is the lawyer. Sis found him for me through the settlement house, which had been forced, after all, to have some dealings with lawyers." "No, she's seeing him on Monday after work." "You going with her?" "I think I better." "Yeah, I think so too. Daddy, you better stop putting down that beer. You're getting to be as big as a house. And I'll call him from work before you all get there. You want a shot of gin in that beer, old man?" "Just put it on the side, daughter dear, before I stand up." "Stand up? Here?" "And tan your hide. You better listen to Aretha when she sings Respect, you know. Tish says she thinks that lawyer wants more money. Daddy, we paid him his retainer. That's why ain't none of us got no clothes. And I know we got to pay expenses, but he ain't supposed to get no more money until he brings Fonny to trial. He says it's a tough case. Shit, what's a lawyer for? To make money, Mama said. Well, anybody talk to the Hunts lately? They don't want to know nothing about it. You know that. Mrs. Hunt and them two Camillas is just a disgrace. And poor Frank ain't got no money. Well, let's not talk too much about it in front of Tish. We'll work it out somehow. Shit, we got to work it out. Fonny's like one of us. He is one of us, said Mama. I turned on the lights in Mama's bedroom so they know I was up, and I looked at myself in the mirror. I kind of patted my hair and I walked into the kitchen. Well, said Sis, although I cannot say that your beauty rest did you a hell of a lot of good, I do admire the way you persevere. Mama said that if we wanted to eat, we'd better get our behinds out of her kitchen, and so we went into the living room. I sat on the hassock, leaning on Daddy's knee. Now it was 7 o'clock, and the streets were full of noises. I felt very quiet after my long day, and my baby began to be real to me. I don't mean that it hadn't been real before, but now, in a way, I was alone with it. Sis had left the lights very low. She put on a Ray Charles record and sat down on the sofa. I listened to the music and the sounds from the streets, and Daddy's hand rested lightly on my hair. And everything seemed connected. The street sounds, and Ray's voice, and his piano, and my Daddy's hand, and my sister's silhouette, and the sounds and the lights coming from the kitchen. It was as though we were a picture, trapped in time. This had been happening for hundreds of years, people sitting in a room, waiting for dinner, and listening to the blues. And it was as though, out of these elements, this patience, my Daddy's touch, the sounds of my mother in the kitchen, the way the light fell, the way the music continued beneath everything, the movement of Ernestine's head as she lit a cigarette, the movement of her hand as she dropped the match into the ashtray, the blurred human voices rising from the street, out of this rage and a steady, somehow triumphant sorrow, my baby was slowly being formed. I wondered if it would have Fonny's eyes, as someone had wondered, not, after all, so very long ago, about the eyes of Joseph, my father, whose hand now rested on my head. What struck me suddenly, more than anything else, was something I knew but hadn't looked at. This was Fonny's baby and mine. We had made it together. It was both of us. I didn't know either of us very well. What would both of us be like? But this somehow made me think of Fonny and made me smile. My father rubbed his hand over my forehead. I thought of Fonny's touch, and of Fonny in my arms, his breath, his touch, his odor, his weight, that terrible and beautiful presence riding into me, and his breath being snarled, as if by a golden thread, deeper and deeper in his throat, as he rode deeper and deeper, not so much into me as into a kingdom which lay just behind his eyes. He worked on wood that way. He worked on stone that way. If I had ever seen him work, I might never have known he loved me. It's a miracle to realize that somebody loves you. Tish? Ernestine gesturing with her cigarette. Yes. What time you seeing the lawyer on Monday? After the 6 o'clock visit. I'll be there about 7. He says he's got to work late anyway. If he says anything more about money, you tell him to call me, you hear? I don't know what good that's going to do. If he wants more money, he wants more money. You do like your sister tells you, Daddy said. He won't talk to you, Ernestine said, the way he'll talk to me. Can you dig it? Yes, I said finally, I can dig it. But for reasons I couldn't explain, something in her voice frightened me to death. I felt the way I'd felt all day, alone with my trouble. Nobody could help me, not even Sis, because she was certainly determined to help me. I knew that. But maybe I realized that she was frightened, too, although she was trying to sound calm and tough. I realized that she knew a whole lot about it because of the kids downtown. I wanted to ask her how it worked. I wanted to ask her if it worked. When there's nobody but us, we eat in the kitchen, which is maybe the most important room in our house. The room where everything happens, where things begin and take their shape and end. Now, when supper was over that night, Mama went to the cupboard and came back with an old bottle, a bottle she's had for years, a very old French brandy. This came from her days as a singer, her days with the drummer. This was the last bottle. It hadn't been opened yet. She put the bottle on the table in front of Joseph, and she said, "Open it." She got 4 glasses, and then she stood there while he opened it. Ernestine and Joseph looked like they just couldn't guess what had gotten into Mama, but I knew what she was doing, and my heart jumped up. Daddy got the bottle open. Mama said, "You the man of the house, Joe. Start pouring." It's funny about people. Just before something happens, you almost know what it is. You do know what it is, I believe. You just haven't had the time, and now you won't have the time to say it to yourself. Daddy's face changed in a way I can't describe. His face became as definite as stone. Every line and angle suddenly seemed chiseled, and his eyes turned a blacker black. He was waiting, suddenly, helplessly, for what was already known to be translated, to enter reality, to be born. Sis watched Mama with her eyes very calm, her eyes very long and narrow, smiling a little. No one looked at me. I was there, then, for them, in a way that had nothing to do with me. I was there, then, for them, like Fanny was present, like my baby, just beginning now, out of a long, long sleep, to turn, to listen, to awaken somewhere beneath my heart. Daddy poured, and Mama gave each of us a glass. She looked at Joseph, then at Ernestine, then at me. She smiled at me. "This is sacrament," she said, "and no, I ain't gone crazy. We're drinking to a new life. Tish is going to have Fanny's baby." She touched Joseph. "Drink," she said. Daddy wet his lips, staring at me. It was like no one could speak before he spoke. I stared at him. I didn't know what he was going to say. Joseph put his glass down. Then he picked it up again. He was trying to speak. He wanted to speak, but he couldn't. And he looked at me as if he was trying to find out something my face would tell him. A strange smile wavered just around his face, not yet in his face, and he seemed to be traveling backward and forward at once in time. He said, "That's a hell of a note." And he drank some more brandy, and he said, "Ain't you going to drink to the little one, Tish?" I swallowed a little brandy, and I coughed, and Ernestine patted me on the back. Then she took me in her arms. She had tears on her face. She smiled down at me, but she didn't say anything. "How long this been going on?" Daddy asked. "About 3 months," Mama said. "Yeah, that's what I figured," said Ernestine, surprising me. 3 months!" Daddy said, as though 5 months or 2 months would have made some kind of difference and made more sense. "Since March," I said. Fanny had been arrested in March. "While you two was running around looking at places so you could get married," Daddy said. His face was full of questions, and he would have been able to ask these questions of his son, or at least I think that a black man can, but he couldn't ask these questions of his daughter. For a moment I was almost angry, then I wasn't. Fathers and sons are one thing. Fathers and daughters are another. It doesn't do to look too hard into this mystery, which is as far from being simple as it is from being safe. We don't know enough about ourselves. I think it's better to know that you don't know. That way you can grow with the mystery as the mystery grows in you. But these days, of course, everybody knows everything, and that's why so many people are so lost. But I wondered how Frank would take the news that his son, Fonny, was about to be a father. Then I realized that the first thing everybody thought was, "But Fonny's in jail!" Frank would think that. That would be his first thought. Frank would think, if anything happens, my boy won't never see his baby. And Joseph thought, if anything happens, my little girl's baby won't have no father. Yes, that was the thought, unspoken, which stiffened the air in our kitchen. And I felt that I should say something. But I was so tired. I leaned against Ernestine's shoulder. I had nothing to say. "You sure you want this baby, Tish?" my father asked me. "Oh, yes," I said, "and Fonny wants it too. It's our baby," I said. "Don't you see? And it's not Fonny's fault that he's in jail. It's not as though he ran away or anything. And—" this was the only way I could answer the question he hadn't asked. "We've always been best friends, ever since we were little, you know that. And we'd be married now if... "Your father knows that," Mama said. "He's only worried about you." "Don't you go thinking I think you a bad girl or any foolishness like that," Daddy said. "I just asked you that because you're so young, that's all. And—" "It's rough, but we'll make it," Ernestine said. She knows Daddy better than I do. I think it's because she's felt since we were children that our Daddy maybe loved me more than he loves her. This isn't true, and she knows that now. People love different people in different ways. But it must have seemed that way to her when we were little. I look as though I just can't make it. She looks like nothing can stop her. If you look helpless, people react to you in one way, and if you look strong or just come on strong, people react to you in another way. And since you don't see what they see, this can be very painful. I think that's maybe why Sis was always in front of that damn mirror all the time. When we were kids, she was saying, "I don't care, I got me." Of course, this only made her come on stronger than ever, which was the last effect she desired. But that's the way we are, and that's how we can sometimes get so fucked up. Anyway, she's past all that. She knows who she is, or at least she knows who she damn well isn't. And since she's no longer terrified of uprisings in these forces which she lives with and has learned how to use and subdue, she can walk straight ahead into anything. And so she can cut Daddy off when he's talking, which I can't do. She moved away from me a little and put my glass in her hand. Put my glass into my hand. "Unbow your head, sister," she said, and raised her glass and touched mine. "Save the children," she said, very quietly, and drained her glass. Mama said, "To the newborn," and Daddy said, "I hope it's a boy. That'll tickle old Frank to pieces, I bet." Then he looked at me. "Do you mind," he asked, "if I'm the one to tell him, Tish?" I said, "No, I don't mind." "Well, then," he said, grinning, "maybe I'll go on over there now." "Maybe you better phone first," Mama said. "He don't stay home a whole lot, you know." "I sure would like to be the one to tell them sisters," said Ernestine. Mama laughed and said, "Joe, why don't you just call up and ask them all over here? Hell, it's Saturday night, and it ain't late, and we still got a lot of brandy in the bottle. And now that I think about it, it's really the best way to do it." "That all right with you, Tish?" Daddy asked me. "It's got to be done," I said. So Daddy stood up, after watching me for a moment, and walked into the living room to the phone. He could have used the wall phone in the kitchen, but he had that kind of grim smile on his face which he has when he knows he's got business to take care of, and when he wants to make sure you know enough to stay out of it. We listened to him dialing the number. That was the only sound in the house. Then we could hear the phone at the other end ringing. Daddy cleared his throat. We heard, "Mrs. Hunt?" "Oh, good evening, Mrs. Hunt. This is Joe Rivers talking. I just wondered if I could please speak to Frank, if he's home. Thank you, Mrs. Hunt." Mama grunted and winked at Sis. "Hey, how you doing?" "Yeah, this is Joe. I'm all right, man. Hanging in, you know. Say, listen, oh, yeah, Tish saw him this afternoon. Man, he's fine. Yeah, as a matter of fact, man, we got a whole lot to talk about. That's why I'm calling you. I can't go into all that over the phone, man. Listen, it concerns all of us. Yes, listen. Don't give me all that noise. You all just jump in the car and come on over here now. Yeah, that's right. Now. What? Look, man, I said it concerns all of us. Ain't nobody here dressed neither. She can come in her fucking bathrobe for all I care. Shut up, you sick mother. I'm trying to be nice. Shit, don't be bitter. Just dump her in the back seat of the car and drive. Now, come on, man. This is serious. Hey, pick up a six-pack. I'll pay you when you get here. Yeah, look. Will you hang up this phone and get your ass, I mean your collective ass, on over here, man? In a minute. Bye. He came back into the kitchen, smiling. "Mrs. Hunt is getting dressed," he said, and sat down. Then he looked over at me. He smiled, a wonderful smile. "Come on over here, Tish," he said, "and sit down on your daddy's knee." I felt like a princess, I swear I did. He took me in his arms and settled me on his lap and kissed me on the forehead and rubbed his hand, at first roughly and then very gently, through my hair. "You're a good girl, Clementine," he said. "I'm proud of you. Don't you forget that." "She ain't going to forget it," said Ernestine. "I'll whip her ass." "But she's pregnant!" Mama cried, and took a sip of her cognac, and then we all cracked up. My father's chest shook with laughter. I felt his chest rising and falling between my shoulder blades, and this laughter contained a furious joy, an unspeakable relief, in spite of all that hung above our heads. I was his daughter, all right. I had found someone to love, and I was loved, and he was released and verified. That child in my belly was also, after all, his child, too, for there would have been no Tish if there had been no Joseph. Our laughter in that kitchen then was our helpless response to a miracle. That baby was our baby. It was on its way. My father's great hand on my belly held it and warmed it. In spite of all that hung above our heads, that child was promised safety. Love had sent it, spinning out of us, to us. Where that might take us, no one knew. But now my father, Joe, was ready. In a deadlier and more profound way than his daughters were, this child was the seed of his loins, and no knife could cut him off from life until that child was born. And I almost felt the child feel this. That child which had no movement yet, I almost felt it leap against my father's hand, kicking upward against my ribs. Something in me sang and hummed, and then I felt the deadly morning sickness, and I dropped my head onto my father's shoulder. He held me. It was very silent. The nausea passed. Sharon watched it all, smiling, swinging her foot, thinking ahead. Again she winked at Ernestine. "Shall we?" asked Ernestine, rising. "Dress for Mrs. Hunt?" And we all cracked up again. "Look, we got to be nice," said Joseph. "We'll be nice," said Ernestine. "Lord knows we'll be nice. You raised us right. You just didn't never buy us no clothes." She said to Mama, "But Mrs. Hunt now, and them sisters, they got wardrobes. Ain't no sense in trying to compete with them," she said despairingly, and sat down. "I didn't run no tailor shop," said Joseph, and looked into my eyes and smiled. The very first time Fonny and I made love was strange. It was strange because we had both seen it coming. That is not exactly the way to put it. We had not seen it coming. Abruptly it was there, and then we knew that it had always been there, waiting. We had not seen the moment. But the moment had seen us from a long ways off, sat there, waiting for us, utterly free, the moment, playing cards, hurling thunderbolts, cracking spines, tremendously waiting for us, dawdling home from school to keep our appointment. Look, I dumped water over Fawny's head and scrubbed Fawny's face in the bathtub in a time that seems a long time ago now. I swear I don't remember seeing his sex, and yet of course I must have. We never played doctor, and yet I had played this rather terrifying game with other boys, and Fawny had certainly played with other girls and boys. I don't remember that we ever had any curiosity concerning each other's bodies at all, due to the cunning of that watching moment which knew we were approaching. Fawny loved me too much. We needed each other too much. We were a part of each other, flesh of each other's flesh, which meant that we so took each other for granted that we never thought of the flesh. He had legs and I had legs. That wasn't all we knew, but that was all we used. They brought us up the stairs and down the stairs, and always to each other. But that means that there had never been any occasion for shame between us. I was flat-chested for a very long time. I'm only beginning to have real breasts now, because of the baby, in fact, and I still don't have any hips. Fawny liked me so much that it didn't occur to him that he loved me. I liked him so much that no other boy was real to me. I didn't see them. I didn't know what this meant, but the waiting moment, which had spied us on the road, and which was waiting for us, knew. Fawny kissed me good night one night when he was 21 and I was 18, and I felt his sex jerk against me, and he moved away. I said good night, and I ran up the stairs, and he ran down the stairs. And I couldn't sleep that night. Something had happened. And he didn't come around. I didn't see him for 2 or 3 weeks. That was when he did that wood figure which he gave to Mama. The day he gave it to her was a Saturday. After he gave the figure to Mama, we left the house and we walked around. I was so happy to see him after so long that I was ready to cry, and everything was different. I was walking through streets I had never seen before, the faces around me I had never seen. We moved in a silence which was music from everywhere. Perhaps for the first time in my life I was happy, and I knew that I was happy, and Fawny held me by the hand. It was like that Sunday morning so long ago when his mother had carried us to church. Fawny had no part in his hair now. It was heavy all over his head. He had no blue suit. He had no suit at all. He was wearing an old black and red lumber jacket and old gray corduroy pants. His heavy shoes were scuffed, and he smelled of fatigue. He was the most beautiful person I had seen in all my life. He has a slow, long-legged, bow-legged walk. We walked down the stairs to the subway station, he holding me by the hand. The train, when it came, was crowded, and he put an arm around me for protection. I suddenly looked up into his face. No one can describe this. I really shouldn't try. His face was bigger than the world, his eyes deeper than the sun, more vast than the desert. All that had ever happened since time began was in his face. He smiled, a little smile. I saw his teeth. I saw exactly where the missing tooth had been. That day he spat in my mouth. The train rocked. He held me closer, and a kind of sigh I'd never heard before stifled itself in him. It's astounding the first time you realize that a stranger has a body. The realization that he has a body makes him a stranger. It means that you have a body too. You will live with this forever, and it will spell out the language of your life. And it was absolutely astonishing to me to realize that I was a virgin. I really was. I suddenly wondered how. I wondered why. But it was because I had always, without ever thinking about it, known that I would spend my life with Fawny. It simply had not entered my mind that my life could do anything else. This meant that I was not merely a virgin. I was still a child. We got off the train at Sheridan Square in the village. We walked east along the West 4th Street. Since it was Saturday, the streets were crowded, unbalanced with the weight of people. Most of them were young. They had to be young, you could see that. But they didn't seem young to me. They frightened me. I could not then have said why. I thought it was because they knew so much more than me. And they did. But in another way, which I'm only beginning to understand now, they didn't. They had it all together, the walk, the sound, the laughter, the untidy clothes which were copies of a poverty as unimaginable for them as theirs was inexpressibly remote from me. There were many blacks and whites together. It was hard to tell which was the imitation. They were so free that they believed in nothing, and didn't realize that this illusion was their only truth, and that they were doing exactly as they had been told. Fonny looked over at me. It was getting to be between 6 and 7. You all right? Sure. You? You want to eat down here, or you want to wait till we get back uptown? Or you want to go to the movies? Or you want to have a little wine? Or a little pot? Or a beer? Or a cup of coffee? Or you just want to walk a little more before you make up your mind? He was grinning, warm and sweet, and pulling a little against my hand, swinging it. I was very happy, but I was uncomfortable, too. I had never been uncomfortable with him before. Let's walk to the park first. I somehow wanted to stay outside a while. Okay. And he still had that funny smile on his face, like something wonderful had just happened to him, and no one in the world knew anything about it yet but him. But he would tell somebody soon, and it would be me. We crossed crowded 6th Avenue, all kinds of people out hunting for Saturday night, but nobody looked at us, because we were together and we were both black. Later, when I had to walk these streets alone, it was different. The people were different, and I was certainly no longer a child. Let's go this way, he said, and we started down 6th Avenue towards Bleecker Street. We started down Bleecker, and Fonny stared for a moment through the big window of the San Remo. There was no one in there that he knew, and the whole place looked tired and discouraged, as though wearily about to shave and get dressed for a terrible evening. The people under the weary light were veterans of indescribable wars. We kept walking. The streets were very crowded now, with youngsters, black and white, and cops. Fonny held his head a little higher, and his grip tightened on my hand. There were lots of kids on the sidewalk, before the crowded coffee shop. A jukebox was playing Aretha's That's Life. It was strange. Everyone was in the streets, moving and talking, like people do everywhere, and yet none of it seemed to be friendly. There was something hard and frightening about it, the way that something which looks real but isn't can send you screaming out of your mind. It was just like scenes uptown, in a way, with the older men and women sitting on the stoops, with small children running up and down the block, cars moving slowly through this maelstrom, the cop car parked on the corner with the 2 cops in it, other cops swaggering slowly along the sidewalk. It was like scenes uptown, in a way, but with something left out, or something put in. I couldn't tell, but it was a scene that frightened me. One had to make one's way carefully here, for all these people were blind. We were jostled, and Fonny put his arm around my shoulder. We passed Minetta Tavern, crossed Minetta Lane, passed the newspaper stand on the next corner, and crossed diagonally into the park, which seemed to huddle in the shadow of the very heavy new buildings of NYU and the high new apartment buildings on the east and the north. We passed the men who had been playing chess in the lamplight for generations, and people walking their dogs, and young men with bright hair and very tight pants, who looked quickly at Fonny and resignedly at me. We sat down on the stone edge of the dry fountain, facing the arch. There were lots of people around us, but I still felt this terrible lack of friendliness. "I've slept in this park sometimes," said Fawny. "It's not a good idea." He lit a cigarette. "You want a cigarette?" "Not now. I had wanted to stay outside for a while. But now I wanted to get in, away from these people, out of the park." "Why did you sleep in the park?" "It was late. I didn't want to wake up my folks, and I didn't have no bread." "You could have come to our house." "Well, I didn't want to wake up none of you either." He put his cigarettes back into his pocket. "But I got me a pad down here now. I'll show it to you later. You want to see it?" He looked at me. "You getting cold and tired. I'll get you something to eat, okay?" "Okay. You got money?" "Yeah. I hustled me up a little change, baby. Come on." We did a lot of walking that night, because now Fawny took me way west, along Greenwich, past the Women's House of Detention, to this little Spanish restaurant where Fawny knew all the waiters and they all knew him. And these people were different from the people in the street. Their smiles were different, and I felt at home. It was Saturday, but it was early, and they put us at a small table in the back, not as though they didn't want people to see us, but as though they were glad we had come and wanted us to stay as long as possible. I hadn't had much experience in restaurants, but Fawny had. He spoke a little Spanish, too, and I could see that the waiters were teasing him about me. And then I remembered, as I was being introduced to our waiter, Pedrocito, which meant that he was the youngest, that we had been called on the block, Romeo and Juliet. People had always teased us, but not like this. Some days I took off, when I could see him in the middle of the day, and then again at 6, I'd walk from Center Street to Greenwich, and I'd sit in the back, and they'd feed me, very silently and carefully making sure that I ate something more than once. Luisito, who had just arrived from Spain, and who could hardly speak English, took away the cold omelette which he had cooked, and which I had not touched, and brought me a new hot one, saying, "Señorita, por favor." He and the muchacho need your strength. "He will not forgive us if we let you starve. We are his friends. He trusts us. You must trust us. You must trust us too." He would pour me a little red wine. Wine is good. Slowly. I would take a sip. He would smile, but he would not move until I began to eat. Then, "It will be a boy," he said, and grinned and moved away. They got me through many and many a terrible day. They were the very nicest people I had met in all New York. They cared. When the going got rough, when I was heavy, with Joseph and Frank and Sharon working, and Ernestine in battle, they would arrange to have errands in the neighborhood of the Tombs, and, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, which it was for them, drive me to their restaurant, and then they would drive me back down for the 6 o'clock visit. I will never forget them. Never. They knew. But on this particular Saturday night, we did not know. Fawny did not know, and we were happy, all of us. I had one margarita, though we all knew that this was against the goddamn motherfucking shit-eating law, and Fawny had a whiskey, because at 21 you have a legal right to drink. His hands are big. He took my hands and put his hands in mine. "I want to show you something later," he said. I could not tell whose hands were trembling, which hands were holding. "Okay," I said. He had ordered paella, and when it came, we unjoined our hands, and Fawny elaborately served me. "Next time it's your turn," he said, and we laughed and began to eat. And we had wine, and there were candles, and other people came, looking at us strangely, but "We know the cats who own the joint," Fawny said, and we laughed again, and we were safe. I had never seen Fawny outside of the world in which I moved. I had seen him with his father and his mother and his sisters, and I had seen him with us. But I'm not sure, now that I think about it, that I had ever really seen him with me. Not until this moment, when we were leaving the restaurant, and all the waiters were laughing and talking with him in Spanish and in English, and Fawny's face opened in a way I'd never seen it open, and that laugh of his came rumbling up from his balls, From their balls, I had certainly never seen him anyway in the world in which he moved. Perhaps it was only now that I saw him with me, for he was turned away from me, laughing, but he was holding on to my hand. He was a stranger to me, but joined. I had never seen him with other men. I had never seen the love and respect that men can have for each other. I've had time to think about it since. I think that the first time a woman sees this, though I was not yet a woman, she sees it first of all only because she loves the man. She could not possibly see it otherwise. It can be a very great revelation. And in this fucked up time and place, many women, perhaps most women, feel in this warmth and energy a threat. They think that they feel locked out. The truth is that they sense themselves in the presence, so to speak, of a language which they cannot decipher and therefore cannot manipulate, and however they make a thing about it. So far from being locked out, are appalled by the apprehension that they are in fact forever locked in. Only a man can see in the face of a woman the girl she was. It is a secret which can be revealed only to a particular man, and then only at his insistence. But men have no secrets, except from women, and never grow up in the way that women do. It is very much harder, and it takes much longer for a man to grow up, and he could never do it at all without women. This is a mystery which can terrify and immobilize a woman, and it is always the key to her deepest distress. She must watch and guide, but he must lead, and he will always appear to be giving far more of his real attention to his comrades than he is giving to her. But that noisy outward openness of men with each other enables them to deal with the silence and secrecy of women. That silence and secrecy which contains the truth of a man and releases it. I suppose that the root of the resentment, a resentment which hides a bottomless terror, has to do with the fact that a woman is tremendously controlled by what the man's imagination makes of her. Literally, hour by hour, day by day, so she becomes a woman. But a man exists in his own imagination, and can never be at the mercy of a woman's. Anyway, in this fucked up time and place, the whole thing becomes ridiculous when you realize that women are supposed to be more imaginative than men. This is an idea dreamed up by men, and it proves exactly the contrary. The truth is that dealing with the reality of men leaves a woman very little time or need for imagination. And you can get very fucked up here once you take seriously the notion that a man who is not afraid to trust his imagination, which is all that men have ever trusted, is effeminate. It says a lot about this country because, of course, if all you want to do is make money, the very last thing you need is imagination, or women for that matter, or men. "A very good night, señorita," cried the patriarch of the house, and Fanny and I were in the streets again, walking. "Come and see my Pat," said Fanny. "It ain't far." It was getting to be between 10 and 11. "Okay," I said. I didn't know the village then. I do now. Then, and everything was surprising. Where we were walking was much darker and quieter than on 6th Avenue. We were near the river, and we were the only people in the street. I would have been afraid to walk this street alone. I had the feeling that I maybe should call home, and I started to say this to Fanny, but I didn't. His pad was in a basement on Bank Street. We stopped beside a low black metal railing with spikes. Fanny opened a gate very quietly. We walked down 4 steps. We turned left, facing a door. There were 2 windows to the right of us. Fanny put his key in the lock, and the door swung inside. There was a weak yellow light above us. Fonny pushed me in before him and closed the door behind us and led me a few paces down a dark, narrow hall. He opened another door and switched on the light. It was a small, low room. Those were the windows facing the gate. It had a fireplace. Just off the room was a tiny kitchenette and a bathroom. There was a shower. There wasn't any bathtub. In the room there was a wooden stool and a couple of hassocks and a large wooden table and a small one. On the small table there were a couple of empty beer cans, and on the large table tools. The room smelled of wood, and there was raw wood all over the room. In the far corner there was a mattress on the floor, covered with a Mexican shawl. There were Fonny's pencil sketches pinned on the wall and a photograph of Frank. We were to spend a long time in this room. Our lives. We'll stop there. I do want to say that despite the fact that I am reading a banned book and speaking about banned books, it should seem odd, perhaps to you or anyone else who might be listening, that I should censor myself. I chose to say the word once, for that is how it was written by the author. But I also know that I am one of those individuals who happens to be white and believes that this is not a word to be taken lightly, and that I have the least right to speak it. I would be interested in your opinion on the matter in the comments. Feel free. This is a worthy discussion, but this is how I feel about it. And if this is to in any way detract from the work, I do apologize, for it is not my intention. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that this is a channel for adults, though there may be the occasional children's book that is read. The point of this channel is to freely express opinions about banned books and their authors, whether popular or not, and to be able to freely read the books. This may sound contrary to what I've just said regarding the N-word, and again, I welcome any comments and discussion on that matter. So, before we close, I'd like to tell you that I do find this novel very interesting in that our author has chosen to focus exclusively, and I take this quote from thoughtcompany.com, one of the sites that you can review in order to explore featured banned books by African American authors, the following. Beale Street is the first Baldwin novel to focus exclusively on a black love story. It is also the only novel in his corpus narrated by a woman. Published at the tail end of the Black Arts movement, it explores love within Black life, centering on the emotional bonds holding two African American families together. This has been a long read, and as usual, I am thankful that you have chosen to join me. Thank you.